Welcome to the Banyan Edge Podcast. Here's your host, Charles Sizemore.
Welcome. I'm your host, Charles Sizemore, and today we are going to answer all of the questions about artificial intelligence that you were too embarrassed to ask. This is a big deal because most of us know something or other about AI. It's been in the news. It's been dominating the stock market. We've definitely seen it in movies. We've definitely seen it in science fiction. What is AI? Is it data from Star Trek? The android? Is it the Terminators from the Terminator movies? Is it Skynet? What exactly is AI? We have a pretty good idea, but let's get into the nitty gritty. Let's make it understandable. And to help me do that, I have brought on our resident tech guru, Mr. Ian King himself. Welcome, Ian.
Charles, nice to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Always a pleasure. Now, I know you've been writing about and speaking about AI all year. This has been a theme sort of within a theme for you. You've been talking about how the rise of automation and AI is absolutely essential to breaking us from the China export mold. It's really important for us to become more independent, to deal with the labor shortages we have right now, really a global labor shortage. So this is really the biggest theme of our lifetimes. We all sort of get that, but the actual nitty gritty of how does this stuff actually work? Like, I've used ChatGPT. I know a lot of our viewers have probably played around with it as well. Phenomenal tool, but how does it actually work? Like, what is the little genie in the bottle here, or the little hamster on the wheel that makes this work? Like walk us through the actual nuts and bolts of it.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And to be clear, we've been writing about AI for the last 5-6 years at Banyan Hill, but really only this year is when the mega trend burst on the scene with the rise of ChatGPT. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But, to simplify, like, what is artificial intelligence? I like to think of it as a machine that makes better predictions. And so, these models, these AI and these algorithms aren't really intelligent in the sense that humans can be intelligent, but they're really good at making predictions, and they get better and better at making predictions.
Let me squeeze in. So they're not sentient. It's not like they think.
I mean, you don't really have to worry about hurting an AI's feelings just yet. Although, I find myself like thanking Alexa and asking it please every now and then, which
that's just
kind of like just a good, keep up the decorum in the household. But other than that, think about how like a self-driving car works. You're sitting there and the car's driving with you in the lane, and the car's making a prediction as to what other things in its environment, cars, stoplights, and other people, maybe a bicyclist. The car is making a prediction of what these other things are possibly doing, and that's how it navigates itself throughout the world in a way that feels like a human would be driving.
Predict? Like let's talk about training the model. Like how does that work? Like how does this prediction happen?
Sure. So there are, AI is a broad term, right? One of the rise of the most important AI right now is what's called machine learning, and that is under the umbrella of AI. And you can think about a machine. A good example of how machine learns is: are you familiar with Google Translate? Like, have you ever gone to Google and said, like, I want to say this in Spanish, or I know you're fluent in Spanish.
I do that every day of my life, Ian.
Okay.
I live in South America.
So the way that the developers train the Google Translate model is they basically just fed it books in one language and books in the other language, and the model read all the books and one in French, let's say, and then read all the books in English, and then it figured out that this word means this word in the other book. And so it basically taught itself to translate. It didn't necessarily take a programmer, and that's what machine learning is. It's one of the reasons why the models that we have now are growing at faster than an exponential pace. Like if you take ChatGPT 3, which was released in late last year, and then ChatGPT 4 was released in March. ChatGPT 4 was a 10 times improvement over what ChatGPT 3 was, and as humans, in just a couple of months, right? And probably at some point this summer, we'll probably get version 5 and then version 6 after that. So, the power of artificial intelligence is growing at a faster pace than our brains can predict. And if you think about that, like the human brain thinks very linearly. Like we take a bunch of stuff that happened in the past and we forecast in the future. Tech grows what we know exponentially, where if you think about Moore's law, the power of a semiconductor, the computational power doubles every 18 months or so. Okay. And so that's why you've seen this exponential growth in computers, where we went from having PCs in the house in the 90s to the smartphones in, the 2000s. And then all of a sudden now we have AI here in the 2020s. Like this all happened because, and no one really predicted this, right? Think about the world 15 years ago. You never would have imagined we'd be living in this world nowadays where it's like you can do all this computer type stuff on a smartphone in your pocket, and it has all these new capabilities and new apps and whatnot. And that is basically exponential growth, growing faster than anyone would have predicted. When we get into the AI world, it's actually going to increase even faster than exponential growth because of the what's called as reinforcement learning from human feedback. So in ChatGPT, essentially, is a large language model, and it's programmed to make a prediction as to what you prompted. So let's say you prompted that you want to write a Seinfeld skit about, two guys on a podcast talking about AI, and it'll write, you and I and the characters of Seinfeld and Kramer. And
wait. Which one of us is Kramer? I don't. Yeah, I want to be Jerry.
I'll let the audience decide that one. And so, but it's a prediction of what you would think that the Seinfeld episode would look like. And as they train the model, the ChatGPT would offer it, let's say, 3 suggestions of what this could look like, and the developers would say this one looks better than the other. In a similar way, those captchas.
And that's what's called training. So for the uninitiated, when you hear about training the model, that's what this is. When the engineers look at the various options and say it's this one.
Right. And the machine is just making predictions as to, what you would want to hear. Same thing with generative AI when it comes to text to visual. So you can actually, type in, I want to see a picture of, Joe Biden eating an ice cream cone, like flying on an ostrich, right? And it'll give you like 3 images. And then
who doesn't want to see that, by the way?
I don't know. Yeah, I know. Not to be too political, but Biden does love all his ice cream, so I could see that picture. So they would come up with a couple of images, and you would choose which one best suits what you're looking for, and so you're reinforcing the model by saying, yes, this works. This is what I'm looking for. This is a good prediction. Good boy.
And so you and I are now the engineers when we use Chat GPT or any of these related AIs, and it gives various options, and we say yes, that one, or we say no, do it again. We are participating in that training process. It's no longer the engineers in the lab. Now it's you and I in the real world.
There are still developers, and there's been a question as to, okay, so now ChatGPT is getting asked very technical questions, which, you might need to be like a college professor to answer like a question on astrophysics. And so they actually, Sam Altman has talked about that they are going to be looking for, let's say like college, like grad students to help build these higher models. So the other thing too is that what we're seeing is the adoption rate faster than any technology in human history. And, I just want to be clear about this. It took Google a couple of years to reach 4 million users, right? ChatGPT, 100 million users in the first 2 months. So this is like nothing we've ever seen before in terms of adoption. I mean, think about automobiles. It took decades before there were 100,000 people who had cars, right? The first automobile was built in the 19th century. And then we didn't really see widespread adoption until 1911 with Ford and the Model T. So this is a technology that is going to be extremely impactful. It is going to increase human productivity. It's going to impact every single industry. And this is really just the year when it's finally burst onto the scene.
Well, okay, that's actually a really good lead into my next question. Mm-hmm. Now, you actually pointed to me a really good article by Mark Andreessen, the venture capitalist. Now, he's not just some guy with money, although he does have a lot of money and he does like to invest it, but he's actually one of the pioneers of the internet. I believe he was one of the founders of the Netscape browser. So before Safari, before Google Chrome, even before Internet Explorer, there was Netscape. And this was mid 90s or even maybe early 90s, come to think of it. And so this guy was really there, at the dawn of the internet. And he had a really good piece where he said, no, this is not going to blow up humanity. This is not what you think it is. This is not what you see in science fiction. This is augmentation. This is not replacing humans. This is not something that makes humans obsolete. This is not going to cause, widespread unemployment. It's not like you and I aren't going to have jobs because there's going to be a chat bot doing this. It's more that it augments us. It's like it's like an appendage. It leverages us. I know you have some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I am really excited for the way that AI will help individuals build their own human capital. And with the rise of the internet, there were some positives, right? There's a lot of things that you can do on the internet, like book a trip, book hotel reservations, or call an Uber. But there's also downsides. You have a supercomputer in your pocket that is trying to get your attention. So all these different forms of social media, Instagram and TikTok, they basically exist to keep us keep our minds focused on that one thing, right? They tickle some sensory in your brain that basically can hypnotize you.
Basically the same parts of your brain that are triggered by drug addiction and alcohol addiction and everything else. So
exactly. I mean, this is obviously is a problem. TikTok is a problem for teenagers across the country. Same with Instagram. And I think that there is a capability in AI to build your own human capital, especially for students, because if you think about the way that people learn, and you think back 2,000 years ago into Roman and Greek times, the wealthy families, the aristocrats, had tutors for their children. And they might
have had their own Plato or Socrates, literally. They would have hired someone of that. Yeah.
And nowadays, we send students to school and they sit in a classroom and they kind of all try to learn at the same time. And then if your student, let's say, gets a bad grade, they come home and you have to hire a tutor. Imagine a smart AI that can actually teach the child at the pace the child is currently learning at and understand, where the child needs improvement and where it doesn't in a very precise way. So, and then the other idea would be, imagine having like a life coach with you at all times that's helping you make better decisions, where that could be the things that you're eating or the exercise you're getting. And it knows you and understands your health, and it is there to kind of give you that little bit of motivation or that incentive to be a little bit better.
Trainer. I mean, imagine when the tech gets better and you can incorporate that into like the biosensors in an Apple Watch. It can, tell you, hey, you're doing the bench press at a slightly wrong angle. Position your arm slightly differently. The applications here are really limitless.
Yeah. And then also just in preventing diseases, like there are already AI models that are able to detect cancer much better than regular models or regular doctors could in the past. So, I mean, that's very exciting. They can predict like early onset of dementia, and they can show you ways to avoid, let's say, Alzheimer's disease if you're elderly. You can imagine some type of AI bot that is taking care of the elderly, something that's much more responsive than Siri or Alexa, and put that into some type of automated robot. Now we're talking about like Rosie from the Jetsons. So, a stock that we advise people to invest in early this year in our February issues is called Symbotic. And what they do is they make warehouse robots. And our thesis was that with the rise of AI, the companies that make automated things are going to become more valuable and more demand, because you have basically a robot that is doing these tasks in the warehouse, and all of a sudden the robot can become more precise. So you can buy more of these.
The robot, and Ian, this is something you've been talking about for the better part of a year now. Mm-hmm. The robot also isn't going to get stuck in China because the port got shut, and it eliminates a lot of those issues as well. So this is a powerful trend on multiple levels.
Right. I mean, the biggest trend, I think, of the next decade is basically, onshoring and reshoring. So for 30 years, we basically shifted production of the world to China and India. Now, after COVID, a lot of the supply lines are moving back to other countries. There's a lot of companies that want to get out of China, perhaps move to other places in Southeast Asia. We have basically the chips war going on here. We're incentivizing, we're building all these new chip factories here in the United States. And so, this is going to be a multi-decade long phenomenon. And my bet is that when you're building these factories here in the United States, the human capital is going to be a lot less. So they're going to have less humans and more automation, just because if you spend in the beginning to replace that worker, it'll pay that investment will pay dividends, obviously, into the future.
Many years, if not decades in the future. Well, it's like the whole reason globalization helped us as much as it did over the last 40 years was our demand outstripped our ability to produce. Mm-hmm. The American worker is highly productive, but the American shopper, we like to buy stuff, and we were outstripping our ability to produce. So AI is the next generation of that. AI enables the American worker as this goes back to this augmented intelligence. You or I, anybody, the American office worker or factory worker is now potentially able to do whatever, double the work he could do before, triple, maybe add a zero to it, make it exponential. So that's where this really gets exciting.
Yeah, and also I want to mention, obviously there is going to be widespread fear on the loss of current jobs, right? So you think about the trucking industry, you've got 3 million truckers. Once you have autonomous trucks, like that eliminates 3 million jobs virtually almost overnight. But in the past, when we've had these big technological breakthroughs, they've actually added new ways for humans to work and find employment. So I'm thinking about this, like at the turn of the century in 1900, 1 in every 4 Americans in the United States worked on a farm. You know what that number's like now? It's like 1 in 100, right?
Or less. Yeah.
Nobody farms. Yeah. So, I mean, in our modern day world, like 20 years ago, like there was no such thing as an Uber driver. There was no such thing as an Airbnb host, right? So you have like all these jobs that came about because of the internet age. TaskRabbit's another one. People can add, if you're a handyman, whatever, you can find work and connect with someone that needs something done on their house. So, I think that like AI is also going to bring that about where there might be some tedious jobs like in middle office. I think a lot of legal jobs will probably be eliminated by AI, but it's going to also create new opportunities for people if they're able to retrain their skills. And that's why I think that this decade is going to look a lot like the 90s. So with the advent of the internet, let's say the mid 90s, you had incredible economic growth, 4 to 5% through most of it. And I do think that we're going to see a very similar thing.
Very strong labor market as well. Yeah, to think about some of the jobs the internet destroyed, the travel agent. Yeah, mm-hmm. Travel agents, you remember when we were kids, if you wanted to take a trip somewhere, you went to a travel agency and they sort of sorted it out for you. Travel agents exist today, but they're really just sort of for niche deals. Like right. That industry basically disappeared, but those people were retrained. They found new jobs. I think that's the theme. For every job that's destroyed, many more are created.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the beauty of capitalism, and this, is that as long as we are increasing productivity, so as long as our workforce becomes more productive, it is going to create widespread prosperity in the long run. So the countries that are, the most undeveloped countries in the world, the problem is they just don't have productive economies. I mean, I think about Venezuela as like a prime example of this, one of the most unproductive countries in the world because of communism and socialism, whatever you want to call it down there, versus capitalist economies. One of the reasons why the US growth rates have been stronger than, let's say, Europe over the last 20, 30 years is because we have basically unleashed capitalism and innovation in our economy, where over there they have a ton of rules that businesses have to follow and restrictions and regulations on everything, whatnot. And so,
I see it every day. I mean, I spend most of my time in South America and in Peru these days. And in my observation, the typical Peruvian worker is a smart cookie and they know what they're doing. Like they're intelligent, but they're still very unproductive because they operate in a system that does not harness their potential.
Yeah. So the other thing too is that the global GDP before the internet was about 25 trillion. We're at 100 trillion now. So we've had a 4x growth in global GDP over the last 25, 30 years. I think we're going to see about a 50% growth in GDP because of AI, right?
Yeah.
So, and you're already seeing this. So one of the big trends in the market this year has been mega cap tech. And the reason for that is, if you think about it, like these are the companies that are going to, make use of AI quickly, right? So like Facebook already has their AI model. Google has their AI model. Obviously, Microsoft has
They're
their
they're
investment.
the ones that for them is low hanging fruit. They're the ones most able to implement quickly.
Exactly. And when you think about AI, the best thing it does is it can write computer code, right? So you can actually 10x the productivity of a developer using an AI model alongside them, right? So
Sure.
and what we've seen this year in tech is we've seen massive layoffs across the board, right? What that's done, why tech is up because of this, is because profit margins are going to be increasing. So you could see a scenario where revenues might be stagnant in a lot of these big cap tech companies, but they've trimmed a lot of the jobs they added in the post-COVID world. And that's going to help operating margins, obviously help profits.
It goes back to what we said about augmentation. It gets more productivity out of each individual worker.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, Goldman Sachs has written about this, about how much just even a 50 basis points increase in annual productivity could mean a huge jump in GDP over the next decade because of AI. So, we're really just on the precipice of this. Obviously, the markets do one thing. We had this mania in 2020 and 2021, and everybody's like, I know a lot of these new technologies, electric vehicles, self-driving cars, they're never going to be here. What happens with technology is that everything happens slowly at first and then suddenly, right? The smartphone came about very slowly, and then all of a sudden everybody's got one of these things in their pocket. And I think
a few executives had BlackBerries back in the day, a few investment bankers, and now everybody has something 10 times better in their pocket at all times.
Precisely. So we putting together a summit to talk about the American AI, artificial intelligence, what it means for your portfolio. We do a big, I'm working with a host named Chris Hurt, and going to be explaining exactly what AI is, what this technology can mean for your investment, what is it going to mean for the economy, and that's coming in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully we can add a link to this webinar that people can sign up for it and come check it out.
Absolutely, we will do that now.
Okay.
So Ian, this has been fantastic. And this was really just sort of the tease. I know you're going to be going into a lot more detail on your summit. So to all of our viewers out there, I would strongly encourage you to participate in this. Ian is one of the most knowledgeable people I know in this space. And this space is going to dominate the investment world for the next 10, 20 years. So this is something you really, really do not want to miss. So on that, Ian, we're out of time, buddy. So I'm going to let you go, but thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Charles. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, always. And thanks to our viewers for checking in. Please join us next week. And until then, go out and make yourself some money.